good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another Tackling Taboos podcast hosted by the Openreach EDN. I'm your host and events lead for the EDN, Stephen Adubafor, and it's my pleasure to introduce three and hopefully four amazing panelists who will be guiding us through the discussion of Islamophobia this year in 2024 specifically. So within the month of November, this is where we raise awareness and have the discussions and take even further action and spotlight the topic of Islamophobia. And yeah, we've got some esteemed panelists here to guide us through the discussion, and then also have a bit of a discussion with yourselves in the audience and answer some questions and really have a deep dive into the topic itself. So we'll start with a bit of an introduction, just so everyone is warm in the room and everyone kind of gets to know each other, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the discussion, and so on and so forth. So just in terms of introductions, if I can ask the panelists to introduce their current job role, where they are based in the UK, and then also why they have this passion to be part of this particular conversation and this solution that we are trying to discuss. So I'll start with our guest, Ismail, and then we'll move on after that.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us to this very interesting and hopefully thought-provoking podcast on Islamophobia, which is very timely, needed as well. So I'm based in Leicester, Midlands, East Midlands to be specific. This has been home to me since my childhood. I have three different sort of areas of interest. By profession, I'm an optometrist. So I have my own practice in prison. Academically, I was linked to University of Leeds as post-research fellow till very recently, where I did my PhD about 4 years ago. And thirdly, I'm involved in political activism. So we have an organization called Friends of Al-Aqsa, where we're mainly concerned with the issue of Palestine. So they're the sort of three areas of my interest.
Thank you, Ismail, for sharing, and welcome to the podcast again. I'll just go in order of my screen, so I'll go with next.
Thanks a lot. Good to meet you all. So I work for BT. So I work within BT Business, and I look after strategy and partnerships within that. Still relatively new to the business, so I joined at the start of this year. Before that, I worked for a number of years at what was O2, then Virgin Media O2. I'm based in London, so I work in BT's One Bram office. And I guess, why is this an important topic for me? So I think as a Muslim, like for all Muslims, obviously, conversations about Islamophobia, anti-Muslim racism, vitally important for all of us. I think for me in particular, I think whilst I haven't, I wouldn't say that Islamophobia, anti-Muslim racism has been life-changing for me. I think as someone who grew up, pre 9/11 and then has spent, 20 odd years in this country post 9/11, I think it's impossible to have ignored the rise of Islamophobia during that period, both explicit as well as implicit and subtle. I've had a couple of experiences in the last year or so in particular, where I think I've seen the subtle, insidious forms of Islamophobia probably impact me and impact my life in one way or another. And so I'm sure we'll go on to talk about some of those examples later, but that's why it's such an important conversation for me.
That was said. Thank you first of all, and welcome again to the panel discussion. Looking forward to hearing more from you later as well. Seba, welcome, Seba.
Hi, thank you for having me as well. So my name's Seba. I'm part of the complex side in Openreach. I'm a systems analyst. Have been for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was part of BT as well, within the call center. So did various different roles there as well before moving on to Openreach. But just coming into, why this conversation is important and how it, especially for myself, it's same as yourself, Faisal. It's very similar, actually. It comes back from my own personal experiences from my childhood, pre kind of 9/11 to then post 11, and yes, the rise of Islamophobia, and just kind of all the hatred that's kind of come along with that since then and how it's grown. It's just there's a lot of personal experience there as well for myself, but also just on a global scale that you can see as well. Yeah. But we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. That personal touch is definitely one that that hits home with a lot of people. Like even myself, I'm not Muslim, but I grew up around like loads of Muslims in my local area, and some of them are my best friends. So I kind of experienced that like kind of secondhand, and like coupled with other like incidents of racism, especially towards like black race and things like this. So a lot of things are quite intertwined in their solutions and also their experiences. So I can definitely relate on a personal level. We will also hopefully have Rahil Khan, who's a former OpenReach engineer, hopefully joining us as well. If he's able to overcome the technical issues, so hopefully Rahil will be able to join us as well. So just to bring the discussion to a bit of a start directly. So in terms of the theme of Islamophobia, so Islamophobia Month, 2023 was kind of focused around Muslim stories. So actually like almost broadcasting and telling important stories in the Islamic communities and really highlighting them and bringing it to surface. So that felt like a good kind of foundation that was built. But this year, 2024, the theme of the topic is seeds of change. So actually kind of looking ahead to, okay, now we know and have a lot of knowledge of stuff, but actually what we're going to do about it. So I guess in terms of like yourselves on the panel, I wanted to kind of start the discussion around, okay, like we are at a certain point, but now kind of what type of things needs to change around Islamophobia, other than eradicating it, which is like the obvious solution. We might be going into a bit more of a deep dive. So maybe I can start with yourself again, Ismail, and we might need you to move a little bit closer to your mic because I know it was a little bit low.
I think I speak loudly. Hopefully, you can hear me. I mean, it's very, very important for us to understand that how we frame Islamophobia and how it's understood. Normally, people understand any type of racism, just not Islamophobia, but generically all types of racism, to be reserved for the far right or the extremist. And Islamophobia and those people of ethnic minority backgrounds or any other minorities will realize that the discrimination that they face on the day-to-day basis is not from the so-called extremist. It emerges from institutes, the places they work in, the day-to-day life that they're going through. And therefore, I think what we need to understand is how we try and counter that. So that's the first myth, if you like, we must overcome, is this idea that racism is somehow reserved to one group of people within the country. It's far from that. It transcends right across the nation, and it impacts people in every walk of their life. And workplaces, of course, are the most important, and that's what we're focusing on today. That is where the experiences of xenophobia, the discrimination, the marginalization takes place. And therefore, we need to be cognizant of how these workplaces should become a better environment for people of all faiths and no faiths. And herein, I think, are several factors that we need to focus on. First and foremost is, I think, the structure of the company itself, to make sure that the hierarchy itself is appreciative of all its employees and accommodates their needs. And there's policies that are in place where the workers also understand that when they transgress certain limits, that they'll be not only be called up, but they'll be policed and also sanctions being taken place against those individuals. So I think that is extremely important. That's the first factor. The second is to educate the workplace and to make sure that they're aware of what is happening. But education on its own will not work if examples are not set forward. And that obviously comes from the management itself. And also constantly reminding people what the aggression against particularly Muslims we're talking about today looks like. I mean, it could be simply a statement, passing by comment. It could be a derogatory remark. It could be collapsing the whole of the problems around the world, or some individual causing a crime, then being a person in a company being asked to be responsible for that. So those kind of stuff are extremely important. And of course, then to celebrate that difference, it's not good enough anymore, I think, for us to simply accept differences. We should actually celebrate that differences. And that has to be done within a company setup. And there are important factors. And finally, I think what we should also understand is that there should be people of all faiths and no faiths and people of different colors within the management structure. It's one thing talking about, we are inclusive or to give lip service, but there's no representation of people of different faiths within the structure of the company. And I think there should be role models right across the spectrum due to their merits, not simply because of their faith or color, but who are, of course, qualified to be in those positions, but they should be represented. So these are the kind of stuff I think we should try and do and see how it can move forward.
No, well said. It's real. Seb, I saw you nodding ahead, nodding along like quite vehemently there. Do you want to come in to build on that?
Yeah, completely agree with everything that Ismail has said there. I just wanted to start off with something. So we've recently seen these, these farmers' protests, which people are like really passionate about, and they're just like, they're considered really peaceful protests, and people are like, this is really awesome, and just really getting behind them. But then you see protests in response to what is happening in Palestine right now, and people's perception changes towards those. The perception is completely different. You get labels like they're a mob, it's unruly, they're dangerous. Why are we seeing this difference in perception? And where does that come from? And you touched on it there, Smile. It's a lack of knowledge, education. We need to build on that. We need to share knowledge. We need to share education on what Islam really is. And we need to show that behavior is not okay. You can't label one party one thing and another something else. It shouldn't work that way. And bringing it just back to like the workplace as well. Just thinking back on when I was asked to do this and how it affected me as a child and into adulthood and stuff. And kids are very brutal. They just say what they think. They don't care. They'll just, racist remarks, comments, they'll just say it, completely without thinking.
Unfiltered.
But, yeah, unfiltered, exactly. But it's weird though, when you're a grown-up as an adult, it's very different, especially now, like on a regular day-to-day basis, like in the workplace, in education, in just different parts of your day-to-day kind of aspect, day-to-day life. You'll come across people, but they're a little bit more subtle in how they are Islamophobic or racist towards you. There'll be little comments, or just you won't be included in things. And like you said, it comes down from management. At the end of the day, we need inclusive management, people that understand these little things. They do affect people. They affect people's psyche, their mental health, and their personalities, and how they approach their work life, for example. I think one of the examples, just a little example I was thinking about is, we've got Christmas coming up now, and you'll find that a lot of people are doing like Christmas do, setting these things up. But then how many managers, how many people who are organizing this are considering that there are Muslim members of this team? Should we maybe consider a place that serves halal food, maybe? Or should we look at places where they'll have like halal options? But how many are actually asking that question, or how many are having that conversation? So it's just these little, I'm not saying they're necessarily racist, but I feel like it's a lack of knowledge and acknowledgement from their side, where I feel like we could really build on that. And I think that's quite important for me.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I think that point on like acknowledgement as well as knowledge is like, that's almost like a key change as well to make. Like, and the Christmas do example, or just kind of team gatherings, is one that I've always tried to fly the flag for. I've said it on multiple different podcasts. Like, if you're doing a team meetup or a team lunch or whatever, like, does it have to be in a pub where loads of people don't actually feel comfortable like drinking, or can it not just be like in a just general social setting, or like doing an activity that isn't just kind of like the default, to actually like kind of caters for like multiple different people, or to a different faiths and beliefs, and especially looking into the Islamic faith as well, like how people, especially our colleagues, do or don't feel comfortable in those settings. But something so small, and it doesn't change the whole picture of the whole meetup that you're doing, but something that helps someone's heart to feel a bit more included into that team, I think is vital at that point. So yeah, I think you both Ishmael and Seba for those points. Oh, yeah,
I was just going to say, it's just asking the question. You might be fine where they've set up, even though they don't serve halal. Maybe there's vegetarian options, that's fine. But it's just being acknowledged, like I said, just having that dialogue, really.
1,000%. Welcome as well, Raheel. See you snuck in there in the background. How are you?
Sorry guys, just so much technical. My team's account, my daughter had her primary school account set up on it. She's went into high school now, and I just couldn't get on. I kept going onto that account, and oh yeah, nightmare. But I got there in the end with the help of my eldest daughter. Yeah, so alhamdulillah.
You made it. No, thank you for joining as well. Do you want to give us a brief intro on yourself in terms of like career background and also what makes you so passionate to want to speak about this topic today?
So I think a lot of guys maybe that are on the call were on the calls on the back of all the riots. So might be familiar with me. Some of you might not, but so I am an ex-OpenReach engineer as of the end of September. So I accepted the voluntary paid leaver package. Yeah, I was there for 20 years. So right now I'm currently not doing a bit of part-time work, but I'm just taking it easy just now. But yeah, so why am I passionate about this? Well, from obviously what a lot of guys have heard before, it was a lot of, to be honest, I knew the Islamophobia side of things, it was there. And yeah, I had, this was a personal experience that, I had many experiences over the 20 years, especially within the first 2 years of joining. And then obviously more so when, these riots happened, and there have been little incidents, across the years as well, but I tended to just avoid people within, team, in the team and all the rest of it. But yeah, I think more so when the riots happened, it just brought it all to the fore. And then it was because of, as Aisha's on, I can see her name there, because obviously the video she made inspired me to obviously come onto these calls and obviously speak of my experience. And I think if people remember, I don't know why, when I was speaking about it, and I think it's just because I was mentioning all the things that were happening. I've just never talked about it before. And then obviously I got a bit emotional, and I don't know where that came from. Obviously I couldn't continue speaking. I was like, wow. So I didn't realize until then how much of an effect, I did obviously have on me. And these were really, nasty, comments that were made, direct comments, some indirect. But yeah, it really made me want to, make sure that nobody else experienced that as well. But obviously by that time I had already accepted the paid leaver package, and I knew I was leaving. Even then, I was a bit scared to stay stuff, and I'm sure many of you'll be aware of what I'm saying. And even now sitting here speaking to you, I'm not working for OpenReach anymore, but it's in your mind, man, that fear of, oh, I'll have the target on my back, or I can't say this because, this will happen to me. I won't get overtime. I won't get it. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So yeah, I'm definitely passionate about it because personally, it happened to me and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. But also, even if it didn't happen to me, it shouldn't be happening to anybody. So yeah, that's where I am.
100%. And with that's what we want from these discussions, that raw honesty and that direct discussion. Because to be honest, we spent enough years kind of like being around the bush and like tiptoeing around stuff, and that's kind of where we've got to the point where things haven't changed. So yeah, like honestly, panelists and audience alike, like don't hold back on things. Keep it respectful within the discussion, but like I encourage everyone to be as honest and direct as possible, because that's the only way we can truly have the honest conversations and make change. Just a quick note for the audience as well, we will have like a good 15-20 minute audience kind of discussion / Q&A kind of section, so you can either put your questions into the chat now before you forget them, or like hold on to them, and we'll allow people to come off mute and share in a little bit. But we'll continue with the panel discussion for now, and then give you guys a chance to jump in a little bit. Guys, I'll bring you back into the discussion as well, just talking on the topic of this year's theme, which is seeds of change. So I guess from your perspective, what are the things that you've noticed that you think really need to change, maybe from a personal point of view or societal?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think a lot of what the other panelists have said resonated, and I think the way I see it is there's probably two types of Islamophobia if we really boil it down. You've got the kind of violent or abusive, very obvious, overt types. And probably Rahil's story is probably an example, by the sounds of it, of a bit of a sobering reminder of actually those things still do happen, and including in the workplace potentially as well. But thankfully, I think probably they're probably not the mainstream. And actually, when they tend to happen, probably exceptions aside, the mainstream societal responses is unacceptable. When, we saw the response to the far right riots and people attacking mosques and all that type of stuff, which was actually the mainstream mass public opinion is this is really bad and we see this as wrong. And then I think we've got the second type of Islamophobia, which is actually unfortunately still extremely common. And to Ismail's point, I think actually is actually acceptable and isn't widely condemned, which is the more subtle, insidious type of Islamophobia, which is probably quite pervasive across large parts of society. Ismail, you mentioned it, and something that the conservative politician Saeed Abarsi mentioned, I think 10 years ago. She coined a phrase which was Islamophobia has passed the dinner table test. And I think it's as true now as it was 10 years ago, maybe even more true, which is the subtle comments, the subtle forms of Islamophobia, the characterization of Muslims in a slightly different way, the otherizing of us, the dehumanizing of us, the way that politicians and media and mainstream society can talk about us in a slightly different way, that we're not quite British and we're not quite part sort of mainstream society. That is extremely common. That is extremely mainstream across, the media, across politicians, maybe potentially in corporate life as well. Seba, you mentioned the characterization of media responses to riots and protests as a brilliant example of that. You can have politicians coming out and pointing at pictures of Muslim protesters and tarnishing all Muslims and saying these are hate marches, these are terrorist sympathizers, which will only happen in the case of Muslims, in my opinion. That's the only sphere where you can basically go out and publicly say, I'm going to tar all of these people with the same brush because I perceive them to be Muslim. I don't even know they're Muslim. I'm just going to perceive them to be Muslim. And Stephen, maybe, you've mentioned you've grown up around Muslims. Maybe you've even been the victim of Islamophobia in the past. And that's how insidious it is, that you don't even have to be Muslim to be the victim of it. You just have to be perceived to be Muslim in order to be tarnished with that brush. We see that from politicians. We see that from media. I saw an example just yesterday. It's a really subtle example, and I haven't seen anyone call it out as Islamophobic, but to me it's Islamophobic. There's a debate at the moment going on in politics around end of life and assisted suicide and things like that. Now, there's a Labour politician who happens to be Muslim, and she's a cabinet minister, who is against this particular legislation. Now, another member of her party, another Labour politician, a peer of the Labour Party, came out and said, I respect this lady, but she shouldn't be imposing her religion on everyone else. Now, I can't think of any other time when, or any other characteristic where, if you have your personal opinion, you have your ideological view, you have your moral standpoint, and you come out and share it, if you happen to be a Muslim, that becomes you imposing your religion on everyone else. If you're of a Christian faith or no faith or any other background, no one investigates, well, why is it they are saying this thing? And I'm going to use your identity or your background or your religion as a reason to almost or any other imply that you are almost acting in a way in which is against British mainstream culture and values because of your religion. She happens to have her opinion. It may be her opinion for whatever reason. It may be she's just playing politics. Who cares? It's nothing to do with her religion. But by it being so mainstreamly acceptable that someone can come out and say, I'm going to point the finger at you and kind of almost subtly imply the reason you hold this view is because you're Muslim, and that's in some way danger. That is the very unique form of anti-Muslim racism that I think exists in the media and in politics and in the mainstream at large. And bringing it back to your point, Stephen, in terms of, well, what do I think needs to change? Look, I think everything that my fellow panelists have spoken about in terms of inclusivity, culture, awareness, all that kind of stuff, I think that's brilliant. I think that's all really good. But I think there's a root cause here, which is the role that the dangerous role that media and politicians have been playing over the last 20 years, maybe subconsciously, maybe consciously in many cases. And I think that is the thing that really needs to change, because I think that's at the heart of a lot of it. Or any other.
Extremely well said. And I think that normalization of just using the Islamic faith as the first stick to beat people with over something that's actually almost illogical. It's the point that we've kind of got to now, and which is unfortunate on that angle. Raheel as well, just on this point in terms of like, so we discussed the theme of last year being but Islamic stories and bringing kind of stories and highlighting things to life, and then this year being the theme of Seeds for Change. I guess from your view, from like either a personal point of view or social point of view, what are the things that come to mind that need to 100% change with regards to Islamophobia?
So within the workplace, obviously, that's I think for me, the management didn't take it seriously at all. So there was so many comments were happening until obviously I felt confident enough to go to my manager at the time. So it was stupid comments like, "How's your uncle Osama?" And I'm like, it's like, "What, your uncle Saddam?" And I remember at the time I was one of the engineers had put on at the end of a jumper stick that sellotape like a mirror, and I was in my van, and they come around it and going like that with the mirror under my van on the end of the stick, pretend, and I'm like, and then obviously then it clicked. He's trying to make fun of me, and obviously the guys that were around to say this guy's got a bomb under his van and stuff. It was stupid stuff. And you know what? Just something came to me today. And it was like the first sort of the indication. I didn't see it at the time, and it was such a stupid comment as well now, and I'm thinking of it. So I was literally a few weeks within my role of an engineer. So I came out from the call center. I remember a manager at the time. I said to him, I says, "Look, when it comes to Friday, I goes, I'm going to need like an hour where on my lunch break where I just need to go to the mosque, and I need to pray and stuff." And he says like, all right, okay, why is that? So I explained it to him. He didn't know, so I made him aware. And I remember the comment he says, "Well, it's not as if we can get time off to go to church on a Sunday." And I was like thinking, "What the hell, man? You're off on the weekends. The whole reason you're off on Sunday is so you could go to church. You don't maybe go, but that's why you're off on Sunday." It's such a stupid comment. And I was thinking, what the hell's wrong with this guy, But he made he huffed and puffed and stuff, and I got. He did tell me, "Look, just go on your lunch breaks." But then I ended up being at one end of the city one time, and I stopped the job and went to the mosque, and he seen the track. He says, "Oh, this is not going to work." Anyway, it ended up putting me on a P&D where I just finished at like 12:30 on the Friday, and I worked the other hours back Monday to Thursday. Obviously, you guys in England, I did work in England, for a few months on lodge. Sorry, a few weeks at a time for a few months, and obviously, mashallah, I was working in London at the time, and that you go to the next street, there's a mosque. You don't have to worry about wherever you are working. Alhamdulillah, you could go and pray Jummah. It's not a problem. But yeah, just that comment, obviously it came to me today. So from the offset, that mindset that, again, it's a shame. It's just in Scotland. Okay, so Glasgow, Edinburgh, maybe not, but I'm in Dundee, so just north of Glasgow. There's not. I was even up until now when I left, I was the only Muslim member in the team, and over the years there did come a few other Muslim, members that come in to other divisions, but within the front line, I was, and even right up to the north of Scotland in SD, I was pretty much from Dundee up the only Muslim. So I get it, there's not a bigger Muslim population here, so I'm not, but they just need to be more aware, the management, of the sensitivities of, even just something as simple as, Jummah prayers. Obviously you guys down south, a lot of the non-Muslim managers, whatnot, will be aware of this. Maybe some are not, but you have a bigger population there. So I think that is a big thing within management. Even around Ramadan time and stuff. Again, because of that experience, you don't want to make a fuss. You just kind of get on with it, you're knackered, you're out in the field. In the summer and that, it was quite hard and stuff, but you just kind of got on with it. But yeah, I think management is, and then obviously with them being aware, then it will filter down into the team, because then then you won't have these these team members making these comments, or treating you differently. So I think the management is where it needs to change, because then they can affect change within the teams. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's that. And to be very honest, like the education side of things is plain and there for everyone to see in abundance. Like even we in the EDN, like, okay, we're doing this podcast today. Every time Ramadan comes around, we do some kind of podcast to like highlight different themes and stuff. So it's not as if people don't know. We're in end of 2024, like going into 2025 now. Like we're past the point of like, oh, really? You don't know that? Like, come on, like do you know what I mean? So I think it becomes a choice at a certain point to be ignorant.
I know. Yeah, as I was going to say as well, even when the riots were going on, what we had all these calls going on, and these were obviously, advertised, across workplace and stuff, and for people to join and come on and all the rest of it. But people just never, obviously took the time to, come on, to these calls. So even then, I don't know whether it's like I don't really care, or whether the management could then just be like, our team meeting this week is going to be this call. We're all going to sit on this, you know what I mean, or something like that. They just didn't care. And there was even a few comments made within our group chat at work about the riots, and can't remember word for word, but I remember one of my colleagues just saying something like because obviously Open Each put a message out. It was getting very scary for people, and obviously Aisha's video was testament to that. But this individual thought it wasn't serious, and he basically says something like, well, what is all this Open Reach wokery? There's nothing going on. Why do they need to send these emails like this? And I was just thinking, wow, this guy just has no clue of what's going on. Like, people's lives are literally in danger, but this guy felt the need to say that he felt that nothing was going on. It's like, come on. As people were hiding in their homes, in their cars, and not wanting to go to shopping centres and stuff. It was crazy. Just because you're not experiencing it doesn't mean that it's not going on. It was crazy. But yeah, the education side, I don't know what you're going. We're going to have to do not like what I say is team calls where you're making the time, not giving people a choice. If you know what I mean? Because all these calls were like, oh, you could come onto this call. Nobody came on. There were some people that came on, but the people that we are needing to reach weren't coming on because they don't take it seriously.
Yeah, there has to be that level of accountability from especially senior management, like director level, to actually allow those things to kind of filter down towards the bottom. Otherwise, yeah, a lot of the time, like you'll get lost in translation. And this is why I wanted to bring you in as well. With regards to kind of like looking forward, and whether some of the things that Rahil's already touched on, or even looking forward in terms of like how do we make sure we're not having the same discussion. It's not even necessarily up to us even to make sure, but I guess what would in 12 months time, 24 months time, like a society kind of look like when we're not at least having these same discussions again.
Just to expand on Rahul's experience, really traumatic. I mean, it just shows that Islamophobia is just not, the theoretical aspect. It has a real life-changing impact on people, and it fragments not just individual families, but actually society itself. But what he touches on is something very, very important. The fact that there is no means to check and control those people who are perpetuating this kind of discrimination. And I think what we are lacking is a definition, that the government has refused to accept a legal definition for Islamophobia. And what that would do is that we could be able to police Islamophobia, and it would be able to take the victims to court and be able to get justice. And I think that lack, is very, very important. And that fits into what Faisal mentioned earlier about Islamophobia passing a dinner table test. I think we've gone beyond that. I think in Britain, unfortunately and sadly, that Islamophobia is celebrated, and politicians are getting votes for being Islamophobic. I mean, we've just had the Conservative Party leadership election, where Robert Jenkins said, if somebody in public says Allahu Akbar, should be arrested. Just think about it. This is a common phrase, a terminology, Muslims use randomly 100 times a day if they're good Muslim. That appreciation. And you should be arrested for it. And these are politicians. We've had a right-wing swing in the last general election with political parties on the banner of immigration, but meaning immigration symbolically means Muslims, winning seats at parliament. So we have a serious situation in our country. And Islamophobia has replaced all sorts of other nasty forms of racism. That means they haven't gone away. Islamophobia has become something that is not only acceptable, but is being celebrated. And that needs to change. And it has to come from top down, but as well as us, as well as Muslims, as companies, make that pressure. What Ruhul has gone through shouldn't simply be forgotten. He shouldn't simply be invited to come here. We should have protests and demonstrations on his behalf. We should be going out there campaigning and lobbying and fighting in the courts for him, because he's a symptom of bigger malaise within the country. So that's the kind of stuff we need to change. It requires a lot of work and effort, and we need to continue that. Just want to add one more thing which we haven't discussed here, and because of the panel that we're mainly people of color who are Muslims or brown people, apart from you, Stephen. But then intersectionality. And two groups of people we normally forget who even suffer more Islamophobic tones than the so-called traditional brown Muslims are people of African origin, ethnic minority, and the white, the reverts, the white revert Muslims. The conversations I've had with them, they're called traitors, sellouts, all sorts of stuff. So they're the two other groups that are really impacted. So here we have to understand, and somebody talked about Muslimness, an expression of Muslimness, is the very idea that has become normalized that anybody who associates with Muslims or anything that looks like Muslims or has been perceived like to be Muslims is an open target. And it's a legitimate target almost, where there's no recourse against that. So we have a long way to go in this country. We are simply, unfortunately, those who are fighting for this to redress Islamophobia are in the minority. But we have to continue. We cannot allow society to be polarized, and we cannot allow the xenophobes to have the day.
No, thank you as well. And that intersectionality point is a huge one, because there's so much more than what meets the eye, and that's even, it's weird. It's like come off like a stereotype of like, of course, like the majority of Muslims being from a brown background, but then like, Islam is a religion. It's not an ethnicity, right? So actually, like, there can be people from all races, colors, creeds, etc. Who can identify as Muslim, and they suffer just as much as brown Muslims. So, and then even further on the topic of intersectionality, I guess, Seba, from your point of view as the only female like panelist as well, like, I guess, has like your like lens of Islamophobia, I guess, potentially like been like different from a female perspective, and again looking forward to thinking of what would 2025, 2026 from a female Muslim point of view like would hope to look like with a bit of change.
Being brutally honest, I think Islamophobia may get worse before it gets better, in my opinion, and here's why. On a global scale right now, we're drifting more towards to the far right, sorry. In terms of like world stage politics, it is drifting far right. So like take America, take here, and then you've got like the mainstream media as well. Again, it's agenda which is again politically kind of driven, motivated, is also supporting to help spread that and fuel that hatred for Islam and for Muslims. So you say, what's it going to look like in 12, 24 months time? Honestly speaking, I do feel like, given the climate of global politics right now, it's not going to, on a global scale, worldwide scale, it's going to get worse, in my opinion, just because of the way things are. And we can see that in recent, like a few months back in the riots that, the panelists have already touched on through the riots. And that's more on, I think, what Faisal was saying earlier on, how that's a more obvious form of racism and Islamophobia. It was very violent. People were afraid, and rightfully so. I mean, personally as well, like I think I went into work one day that particular week, and something I never would have noticed, but I noticed on that particular journey into work on the train, I was the only brown person on that train. And usually, you get a very mixed, very, level number of people of ethnicities and such, but I was the only one, and it made me be wary. I was more kind of looking around, it sounds silly to me, like you even to myself, thinking to myself, I do this journey every day. Why am I being so wary for? But it was a real thing. People were affected by the violence at that time. So that's like your one kind of form of it. And then the second, which is as Faisal said, is that kind of subtle, which we all have felt at some point in our lives more than once, I'm sure, but it's systemic. It's through politics, like you guys have already said, our politicians are fueling that behavior. It's not okay, but they're doing it. It's done through media. Again, it's being fueled and spread, widespread. And I think in order for us to kind of counter that, it's going to be difficult. Like you've said, it is going to be really, really difficult. I mean, how do you tackle something that is so deeply rooted in every area of society from top to bottom? It's everywhere. You can't deny it. And I think for me, a big part of it, like the huge step, it's just gonna be sharing knowledge. It's gonna be communicating, having honest, open communication with people, and just having patience and tolerance for people. And you have to, as a Muslim, I have to show who I am to the next person, to the people I work with, to people I see every day, talk to. I have to show them who I am as a Muslim, what values are important to me. And I think through that, you may be able to change at least one person's mind. And if I've at least changed one person's mind about myself, about my faith, then I feel like that's a little victory for me. And it's like you said, it's a seed, not a tree. You've got to start somewhere. And I think, it's important to start there, I guess.
Yeah, and it's an important realization where, like, yes, some things will likely get worse before they get better. Like even the global scale of like racism or like like Islamophobia, like so many different issues that are facing. Like the trend is going like this before.
Yeah, it's like Islamophobia seems to be like the last form of acceptable racism. It's just so wide, as you panelists have already kind of said this. It's widely accepted and it's celebrated. You were saying as well, which is just shocking. Like how in this day and age can something like that be celebrated? We should have protests. You were saying against it, not not celebrating it, not voting for politicians who are kind of supporting that form of racism. It shouldn't be that way. And the fact that we're having to have this conversation in this day and age to tackle that problem is actually pretty mind-boggling. Like how we still in this. Do you know what I mean? How are we still discussing this as an issue? But we have to change the narrative at the end of the day, little by little.
Or any
Well said. Faisal, for yourself, so looking this time 2025, this time 2026, what would any kind of realistic change look like in your eyes from Islamophobic point of view?
So I probably agree with the discussion, which is there's the very real possibility that it gets worse before it gets better. And I've studied history, and I think the situation for Muslims in this country and in Europe, very reminiscent of the situation in 1920s and 1930s Europe, and we all know what happened there. And that seems and sounds melodramatic, and maybe it is a little bit, and hopefully things will never get that bad. But I know personally, my family have had the conversation about what happens if things get too hot for us in this country, and what's our exit plan. And I thought that was just me and my family, but actually, speaking to friends, actually, so many Muslim families have a plan B. They have a get out of this country plan in their back pocket, which, and especially for, some of the non-Muslim members of the audience, it's really quite crazy that British citizens are in a position where whether it gets that bad or not is a different matter. But the fact that many of us feel we need to have an exit plan from the country of our birth to get out of here, just in case things get worse is crazy. And that really is a sign of how bad it is. And the other thing I'd say is a sign of how dangerous it is this isn't really just like hurt feelings is bad enough, but emotional damage and mental health is, we all know that's important. But it's not just about that, because actually I think Islamophobia costs people lives. Thankfully not too many in this country, but actually a lot of the events that are happening around the world, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the fact that Tony Blair and George Bush could kill 500,000 Iraqis, and it could be written off as collateral damage. I think these things are only really possible in the context of the 20-year dehumanization of Muslims, the 20-year indoctrination of mainstream public opinion that Muslims are somehow different, that Muslims are somehow othered in society. And I think it's so important that we bear in mind this is hurt feelings and mental health are really important, but actually it's literally costing hundreds of thousands of people their lives. Thankfully not in this country, but around the world. And I think that context is really important. So that's a sobering, probably reality check of how serious it is and where we are. Hopefully on a more kind of, hopeful, positive tone, I guess, what can we do about it? And I guess that's a more important thing, right? Really hard, like I think all of the other panelists have said. I think there's two things that I think we need to think about. What's the role that Muslims can play and what's the role that everyone can play in this? I think the role that everyone needs to play in this is, well, if the root cause of so much of the problem is the dehumanization of Muslims by politicians and the media, then actually the number one place to start in terms of trying to stop it is by calling out those institutions, calling out those double standards, calling out those hypocrisy, and voting with our feet, whether it's at the ballot box or whether it's at, not buying certain newspapers, not consuming certain media, calling things out, working with alternative brands and corporations that aren't perpetrating these crimes, let's say. And I think that's really important, that every single one of us can play a role in calling out double standards, particularly those of us in privileged positions. We need to call out these double standards. We need to vote with our feet. And I think that's the role that everyone can play. And I know there's been a lot of chat in the comments around what can we do. I think if there's one thing I'd say we should all take away from this, it's call out hypocrisy, call out double standards, vote with your feet wherever you see it, and you will see it on a daily basis. The second thing, and I think this is one that for Muslims, for us to play a particular role in, and Seba, you talked about us being great ambassadors for our religion. And, I've seen Omema in the comments mention that as well. I think that's really important. The only build I'd have on that is it really actually shouldn't be on the victims of a crime to be the ones to change it. But having said that, we've got the most incentive to change it. And so we therefore do need to very consciously be the best ambassadors of our religion as we possibly can. But I think what's really important is that Muslims need to make sure that people around them are aware that they're not a good person and a productive member of society as an exception to the rule. They are a good person and a productive member of society because of our religion. And I think so many people, and I've had experiences where it's like, oh yeah, you're not like them. You're a good Muslim. And my point is, no, there's no good Muslim, bad Muslim. The vast majority of us are like this, and we need to educate people, which is actually we're not like this in spite of our religion, we're like this because of our religion. And I think getting that across to correct some of those misconceptions that people have about Islam is so important. Let's be the best ambassadors we can, but let's make sure people realize the reason we are this way. It's not despite our religion, it's actually because of it.
And just even on that last point, people are people, right? Like, you can be Muslim, Christian, Jew, etc., and be a good person, a bad person. So it's like to hold that as like the standard. And I think, as we mentioned earlier in the discussion, it's like if someone then does something wrong or says something out of turn, it's like in the Islamic point of view, then for people using Islamophobia, then that will be the first thing to beat them with. Whereas if it was someone from another faith or no faith, it's like, yeah, because they're just a bad person. So like, why? Yeah, why the double standards? Yeah, it's
no, just to build on that, completely agree. And I think it's I think we talk about education playing a role in being really important. I think the sobering reality check is that even when you interact with people who are this way inclined and who have just suffered from the indoctrination from the media for just too long to think differently, actually then often I've had experiences, my next door neighbor actually, who would say, oh no, but you're not like them. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the others. And actually it doesn't matter how many good Muslims they come up with, actually 20 years of indoctrination and seeing all these pictures of these bad Muslims and doing these things and not integrating and committing atrocities and that type of thing. It doesn't matter how many times you educate people and how good an ambassador you are. Actually, they're just going to think that you're the exception rather than rule. And actually, it's so important to open their eyes to, no. Those people you see on the media,
they either don't exist or they're such a small minority. It's just a warped view you've got. And I think that's so important that we get that message home.
No, 1000%. Thank you for highlighting that. I want to open up the floor as well to the audience, because I know there's been like tons of discussion in the chat and people have really been getting involved as well. So yeah, like audience, feel free if anyone's got wants to raise their hand to like make any kind of addition to the discussion or ask the panelists any question, then the floor is very much open for the next 10 minutes or so. And as well, see if there's any direct questions in the chat as well, then please also let me know.
Can I just intervene? Somebody asked, why do we have Islamophobia? It's interesting here, really, that up to now, up until I think 1997, to be very specific, the hatred against Muslims wasn't called Islamophobia. It was called something else, anti-Muslim hatred. And the reason it's called Islamophobia is because it's doing special work. It's delivering for those who are perpetuating this crime certain dividend. And I think it's very important for us to understand that, not simply because of academic reason, but because it helps us to counter Islamophobia. So what are people who are Islamophobic are not simply, especially those who are instigating it, not the people on the street, those who are instigating it. They have real dividends out of this. So with Faisal and Isabel also mentioned the international dimension of Islamophobia, where political leaders and governments want to destroy one group of people, mainly Muslims, and for them to demonize them, they have to create a caricature and become Islamophobic and then sell that. So they have dividend out of that. And the new idea that is emerging is what we now call Islamophobia. Similarly, in Britain, our politicians are getting more votes because they have to sound Islamophobic. They have to, make Muslim demons, ghosts, that dangerous, that are roaming the street. So this is the work that's doing. So therefore, our intervention needs to come in that areas as well. And just to expand on one point from everything Faisal mentioned as well, is we've all talked about education, but education is not giving somebody a book, simply giving somebody a lecture. The biggest education we can give is our interaction with them, in particularly Muslims' interaction with the wider community. And you will find that, as Faisal have already mentioned, the neighbor, the example you gave, if you had not interacted, even that neighbor wouldn't start asking questions about what they're seeing and perceiving. So maybe we becoming ambassadors as Muslims is not to tell people, look, we are good, or no, it's simply them seeing us as human beings, to break that stereotypes, to break that things that is emerging from the elites. And that elite, of course, is a big group of politicians, media, think tanks, the popping heads on our media channel, all these kind of groups that create this environment and who are benefiting from Islam. So Islamophobia is not simply, so the direct answer to that question is Islamophobia is not naive. It's not something that has emerged because of some real problems with Muslims. No, it's emerging because it's paying dividends. So from political leaders, just 1 second on this, sorry, is to arms industry. People want to have war because they want to create millions of pounds of money. And look at America. I think 30% of America's GDP is in industry and military complex. For them to perpetuate war, they need to create a crisis. And at the moment, from after the communist and the collapse of USSR, the next are Muslims. They're global, and that creation also creates a problem. So Islamophobia is a big problem. It is global. It is paying dividends to those who are Islamophobic, and we need to be aware of
that. No, well said. Thank you, Ismail. A couple of very, very, very good points made as well. And on the point of change in action, one of the earlier questions I saw from Asima was relating to a couple of the last points that were made by Ismail and Faisal around the media and the harmfulness of what politicians do. And I guess the question being, with this in mind, how best can we organize or mobilize people to combat this and bring people together so that we can actually stop the quote-unquote powers that be actually dividing people? Asima, your hands up.
Yeah. So I know that I think Faisal and a few others had kind of answered it in some of the earlier points that they raised, but I think the concern, in terms of the emergence of the far right, it's real. It's the riots is just one way that we've seen it. But if you don't have to look further, like look at the country, the Reform Party, there was a lot of votes there, and a lot of the language that was used by them has become normalized today. And then look at the US and the Europe countries as well. So I think with that in mind, like there's a lot that we can do as individuals in terms of like our voting powers, where we spend our money, boycotting certain establishments, for example. But you're always going to be fighting with the powers that be ultimately. And I think that part is the scary part for me. So it would just be good to kind of, it feels like you're going one step forward and then 10 steps back when you're trying to do good stuff and combat a lot of this harmful stuff that's happening like around us.
Can I just sort of intervene one thing here? We've all used it, and sometimes we use it flippantly. We talk about the rise of the far right. I think we should try and reframe that and say the mainstream is becoming Islamophobic. And that thinking, I think, is important. It's just not just academic. Because when we say the far right, there's a rise of far right, it always seems like a fringe element. It seems somebody who's not like a nutter. It's not. These are the normal people who are Islamophobic. And I think we should start thinking that the mainstream is becoming Islamophobic. And I think once we start thinking on those lines, hopefully we're better equipped. We're trying to have this discussion to see how we can counter it. And that's the only reason I'm objecting.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's that reality of it. It's not people who are far, and it's people who you work with. Faisal's neighbor, like it's people who are in and around you, like on a day-to-day basis. So let's, like, the same way that it's been normalized in the mainstream as an attack, let's actually normalize the attackers who are actually perpetuating it as well. Just before I come to Glenn and remember, like one of the quotes I definitely wanted to read up from Jessica in the chat was, if you claim to be someone's ally but haven't been hit by the stones thrown at them, you aren't standing close enough. I think that's like, that sums up allyship in a nutshell. Like if you truly, and there's a lot of like non-Muslim people on this call, and even myself being one of them, like if you're someone who truly cares or claims to care about like particular issues that don't affect you, then actually like getting as close to those real experiences as possible and really like standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who are affected by them can truly show your allyship in that sense. So it becomes more than just performative action, and on that sense. Glenn, I think you're next with your hand up.
Yeah, hi there. I've been hit by quite a few stones, to be honest, but I think I probably ask for them very often. I want to ask a kind of it sounds like a wrapping up question, but what would the panelists, what's the one thing that you think we should be doing? How do we convert this? And these are great conversations. I'm so pleased we're having them now, but it's taken a long time to get to this point. What's the one thing that you think we can do as allies, as Muslims, as just people that want to see things better? What's the one thing you say we could do? I know the answer is nearly always education, but I'm always of the opinion that you can only educate people if they want to be educated. And a lot of these people who cause them problems gave up education even when they were at school. So how do we change the narrative?
It's open to the panel. To be fair, I think the panelists are all going to share one takeaway anyway, so I think we can kind of go around and do that now. So I guess, Raheel, I don't know, maybe start with yourself. I guess one takeaway.
Again, I like that, obviously with Faisal, what Faisal mentioned, and obviously Brother Ismail as well, within regards to the politicians and the media. But obviously, and I agree with all that, I love it, and I have that on my mind as well. But I like talking about my experience, obviously, because we're on this, the workplace. Every little bit matters, it doesn't mean that we start with the big fish and the politicians need to, even on the ground, which we might perceive as just small, but in the workplace, I remember mentioning this to somebody just before I was leaving, that like the what are they called, the CVTs that we do, the mandatory CVTs and all that we do. The older ones are always just so boring and this so dull. But see the more recent ones, some of them are like, whoa, this is like a short movie production. They're quite hard hitting. The ones where, the guy's going into a rude customer's house and he's getting sworn at, and I was like, whoa, they've got swearing on these CVTs. Like, what's going on? But they're making it real, And I did personally. I sat up and I was like, okay, this is quite interesting because I related to it. When you've got a kind of freaky customer's house that you're going into, you're like, okay, I've experienced this before, so that I think would be amazing. And even, taking real, if you wanted my experience, I could, I'm happy to, detail it and how it happened with colleagues. And maybe I didn't experience it with customers, to be honest, but it was just with colleagues, unfortunately, in management. So, having these CBTs made where it wasn't uh, being it wasn't like a tick box exercise where you had to kind of do it on your own time, where you have to then maybe watch it as a team, or like take it in like three parts of the team, or half the team watch it one day, because they're always crying about, oh, we can't give absences, and busy and work and all that nonsense. So, yeah, I can see all this now, man. It's amazing. But yeah, so honestly, these, for me personally, when I was watching these obviously unrelated videos to Islamophobia, um the more near ones, honestly, they were really well made, and they were quite hard hitting. So if something similar can be made to tackle this, with real life stories and experiences, I think that would be good, and it would maybe help me people to think like, oh man, okay, that guy's maybe feeling like that, or he's felt like that, he's Muslim. I think that would help.
Yeah, no, well said. Yeah, I think it was the let's talk about race training that I think you were referring to, which
I think it was race, but it was also ones where the engineer was going into a customer's house that was swearing at him, and and it was just very real, and obviously
yeah,
they were actually swearing in the video, and you're like, "Oi, this is workplace. You know how to swear, right?" Obviously, we all do, and you hear it all around. But because it was real, it was like a real life scenario. It was more like, okay, yeah, this is hit hard. So yeah, I think something like that would be very beneficial. And again, watching it as a team, or splitting it up into 5, 6 people, and then another 5, 6 or whatever, but not an individual thing where you could just play the video and go and be making a coffee in the background and not watching it. You understand what I mean?
yeah, you have to lock in
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Seba, for yourself, and so, apologies to the audience, are sort of conscious of time, but yeah, those who can stay on, please feel free to do so. But yeah, Seba, yourself, I guess your one takeaway on the change point, and yeah, what people can do to mobilize.
To mobilize. Uh, okay, so for me, the one kind of big takeaway is I think someone said earlier on about how can we mobilize, the masses. Like, I mean, we all here. I'd like, I'd like to consider everyone on this call is kind of already there. That's why we're on the call. But it's not the people on this call that we need to convince. It's like you said, it's the masses out there. And how do we do that? It's systemic. So how can we do that? It's difficult. It's not going to be an easy job. And I think in terms of just bringing it back to work-wise, it's being consistent in these conversations. So yes, this is great that we've had this podcast today, but we should have some consistent conversations, not just within the networks, but kind of trickle them down to teams as well. And it needs to come from top down. It needs to come from management, upper management, into the teams where we have these conversations, and just have them open, honest conversations. People shouldn't feel uncomfortable to ask questions. Ask those questions in a respectful manner, so that we can then share our knowledge. We talk about, like, and I've said it as well in the past, like, we need to share knowledge, we need to educate people, but you can only educate those that want to be educated. Which is, it's difficult to educate someone that just isn't interested, and maybe that's because of their prejudices, or because they don't understand something, they're naturally already afraid of it, so they just don't want to go near that. But this is where we have to have consistent conversations, and just be really, really open minded, be respectful of each other, and tolerant, and just, yeah, continue to have the conversation. In my opinion, yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's definitely that element of like we can't just rely on even the network. So like us as the EDN, okay, we're bringing this to light, and that's what we'll do in like our voluntary capacity, and the people who are having the passion to talk about them will come on, and but yeah, it becomes
But
an echo chamber to a certain point where we want the people who are actually like need to hear these conversations being the ones to kind of hear them.
Yeah, you've kind of already won the battle, almost with the people who are already on here. I feel like everyone here is here because they want to be here. That they are. That's why they're here. They want to learn. They want to educate themselves. Trick is to hit those that aren't here and don't want to necessarily have that conversation off the bat. It's engaging them and knowing how to engage them. And I think that in terms of like work wise, that needs to come from, I feel, not just, I can't just say just upper management. I think the responsibility lies on all of us. We all need to challenge certain behaviors, comments, remarks, to say, actually, do you really should be, should you really be saying that? Like, this affects me in this way, or what have you. So yeah, I feel like we all have that responsibility, to challenge that.
No, definitely. Faisal, for yourself.
Sure, just I know we've run over, so I'll be very brief. Two things for me in terms of key things we can all do practically to try and change the situation. Number one, boycott the organizations and individuals who are perpetrating this hate. And if we all vote with our feet, then that will hit them where it hurts. I think to Ismail's point, a lot of it is economically motivated. So if we boycott them, if we cut them off at their knees, figuratively speaking, of course, then obviously that will hit them where it hurts and it will make the difference. That'd be number one. And number two, I think we can't ignore the need to all collectively speak out against the murder of Muslims all around the world, because as long as we correct things for British Muslims at home, but Muslims are continuing to be murdered around the world, that will only perpetrate the dehumanization of Muslims. Not only is it a bad thing itself, but it will continue to dehumanize Muslims, and it will continue to plant that seed and sow that seed that Muslims are different. And actually, if our politicians, if it makes sense to go and kill hundreds of thousands of them around the world, well, why are these guys at home any different? So I think for as long as we kind of support British Muslim colleagues and friends, that's fantastic. But we also need to ensure we're speaking out and advocating against the murder and the dehumanization of Muslims all around the world, because that has to stop in order for all of us to have our rights respected and to be viewed on the same par as citizens as everyone else. So those would be my two key takeaways.
No, amazingly put. Thank you for that as well. And Ismail, for yourself.
Sure. I mean, I agree with all the recommendation. It just simply shows how complicated Islamophobia is, or how many sort of tributaries are feeding Islamophobia. So we have to do so many stuff, and each and every one of them is commendable, really. But for me, two takeaway points really are: we need intervention. While Muslims should be the ambassadors, we need intervention from non-Muslims. I think too many times non-Muslims simply stand by and are observant. Silence is no longer an option. They need to speak up. And I think we need non-Muslims to come out more and talk about the hurt that Islamophobia is causing to the society overall. But more importantly, I think we need to campaign our politicians. I think we should be writing to our MPs that they accept the APPG definition of Islamophobia. Because at the moment, Muslims are not covered by law. Islamophobia, when Islamophobia attacks happens to them, they're covered by other laws, and they're not significant enough. So we need legal cover for Muslims. And I think those two things are paramount. But overall, we need to do everything that everyone has mentioned.
Thank you very much. There was a final question from a member, which we won't get time to speak about, but if any of the panelists do have a contribution, it was around like kind of where do we get to where is, and it's similar to Ismail's last point, where like, for example, Islamophobia is on the same level as being anti-Semitic or racist or something like this. It's like, actually, how do we get to that point? I think it links to what Ismail was just speaking about there. But panelists, if you do have a direct answer, then please feel free to reply to our members' message, or if you send it to me directly, then I can pass it on to herself and the rest of the audience. But yeah, we will bring this podcast to a close. So firstly, I want to say a massive thank you to our four panelists for coming on, for your contributions, your passion, your honesty as well. And like, I think this has definitely been a podcast where no holds barred, and this is the type of discussion that we kind of need to really hit home what the message is, and that ongoing theme of what next, like where we're going forward and what can be done in the future. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to the audience as well for all your contributions, for your time, your ears. Thank you for sticking with us as well, just for a few minutes over. But I think we're all here because the discussion is where it kind of needs to be in that aspect as well. So thank you guys as well, and please continue to keep this discussion going, whether it's on your internal workplace channels, but also on wider social media channels and panels. This podcast itself will be released on our EDN YouTube page, or we'll post like the link for it on our YouTube page. So if you want to share it to any external people, then you can do, and then it will also be posted on our internal workplace pages as well, just to share to the rest of the colleague space as well. But yeah, thank you very much for your ears this Monday afternoon, and I'll speak to you all soon. Have a good rest of your day and week.
Thank you.